Sharks, the mysterious predators of the ocean, silently move through the depths, evoking both wonder and terror. These extinct fish with strong jaws and acute senses are evolutionary wonders. Despite their rarity, shark attacks captivate people with their survival and mystery stories. Every experience with these magnificent animals serves as a reminder of the wild side of the sea. It is essential to understand their behavior to reduce risks and promote coexistence that honors sharks' vital role in marine ecosystems. Through study and preservation, we can recognize their strength and beauty. Here are 6 stories. The secluded Crescent Beach, tucked away along Oregon's rocky coastline, was the ideal getaway for Emma Galloway and Jake Blakely in the summer of 2009. This remote location away from the crowds where the waves of the Pacific kiss the unspoiled sands was the couple's choice for their anniversary getaway. Due to its unpredictably fluctuating tides and rocky outcrops, Crescent Beach was not a popular tourist destination. However, it was perfect for Emma and Jake, who liked adventure and solitude. The day had been quiet. Above them, the sky was endless and the beach was golden from the warm sun. After hiking the neighboring cliffs in the morning and taking in the expansive views of the ocean, they decided to swim to cool off. They waded in, slowly laughing as the calm waves lapped at their ankles. The water was refreshingly cold, starkly contrasting to the day's heat. They felt the tide's soft pull as the afternoon went on, drifting idly past the crashing waves. Everything appeared calm until Emma spotted an odd object close to the coast. She noticed a tiny but desperate agitation in the water. She initially believed it to be driftwood caught in the shallow's surge, but as she squinted, she saw that its motion was too erratic. They swam closer to look into it after she gestured to Jake. The large, dark shape thrashing in the shallows, sending up water sprays with each desperate movement, became more visible as they got closer to the shore. Was it a shark of any kind? They immediately recognized it as a juvenile great white due to its body's size and fin's characteristic shape. Even though it was only 10 feet long, the creature was a formidable sight. The shark was stuck in what looked to be a jumble of trash and fishing lines. Its strong tail pounded against the waves in a fruitless attempt to break free from the swirling water close to the rocks. Emma and Jake's brains could not process the situation momentarily, and they both froze. Sharks were dangerous predators, particularly great white sharks. Every warning they had heard about sharks advised them to avoid the water and leave immediately. However, something changed in them both as they watched the shark thrash in fear. Instead of being a monster, it was a living being that was afraid and stuck. Jake was the first to say something, but his voice was unsure and quiet. They could leave the beach and act as though they hadn't noticed. After all, there were no park rangers or lifeguards to assist. However, neither could get rid of the impression that they were this shark's only hope. It would die if they left it there, either from exhaustion or being forced farther onto the rocks by the incoming tide. Emma nodded in agreement despite her fear. They were unprepared, lacked prior marine rescue training, and had no idea what would happen if they approached too closely. But before they could change their minds, they found themselves approaching the flailing shark. The situation grew increasingly perilous as they came. The shark's strong tail stirred up the water, and occasionally it would violently whip its body to one side, sending waves hurtling in their direction. The thick, coarse fishing lines entangled around the shark's body, and its fins were now visible to them. Probably dragged in from some abandoned fishing gear that had been allowed to rot in the ocean, it was a mess of plastic and seaweed. Emma and Jake looked at one another. Despite its youth, the shark was still a wild animal and could easily hurt them in its haste. Time was running out, but they needed a plan. The tide was already beginning to rise, and the shark's movements grew increasingly frantic by the minute. Jake reached into his backpack and took out a small rusted knife they had used to cut through some tangled vines earlier in the day while hiking. Though it wasn't much, it would have to do. They approached the shark cautiously as they waded into the shallows, their hearts racing. The lines looped multiple times around the shark's tail and pectoral fins before being securely wound around its dorsal fin. Emma concentrated on the tail while Jake approached the head, where the lines were slicing through the shark's skin. The shark kept flailing, its movements erratic and untamed throughout. Jake's hands trembled from the strain and the worry of what might happen if the shark suddenly turned against him. But he could get his knife under one of the lines and cut through it. Jake was almost knocked off his feet by the shark's violent jerking as the first line broke free. It was just the beginning. Emma struggled to cut through the thick ropes as she found her way through the tangled mess near the tail, her fingers slick with salt water. Every second felt like an eternity as they battled against time and their fear. And the tension was intolerable. They had reached the final line at last. The shark's sense of freedom made it even more agitated and began to lash out with newfound vigor. The shark twisted violently, rubbing against Jake's leg as he cut through the last rope. The rough skin gave him a sharp sting, but before he could react, the shark had vanished, launching itself into the deeper water with a forceful burst of speed. They both remained motionless for a moment. Once more, the only sound on the beach was the soft lap of the waves against the sand. Jake looked down at his leg, where a shallow cut was starting to drip a thin line of blood. Although it wasn't serious, it was a clear reminder of how near something much worse had been. Shaken and exhausted, they fell to the sand and watched the horizon where the shark had vanished. They had succeeded. They defied all odds and risked their safety to free the creature. They were still experiencing the effects of adrenaline, but they also felt a great sense of relief. Emma and Jake became acutely aware of how close they had come to disaster as the sun set, creating long shadows across the beach. They almost lost their lives as a result of their unplanned act of bravery. But they also saved a life that most people would have feared, but they chose to help despite their fear as a reminder of the fine line separating danger and compassion, fear and empathy. The memory of that day lingered with them in the years that followed. They would never forget the picture of the shark swimming unhindered into the vast ocean, even though they never went back to Crescent Beach. The California Pacific coast was crowded with surfers in the summer of 2002. The ocean served as both a playground and a haven for the little seaside town of Pescadero. Perfect waves were brought in by the swell that came in from the deep. Since he was a teenager, surfing had been a part of Tommy Verlaine's life, and he was now an experienced surfer in his late 20s. He was aware of the tide's breaks and minute changes in wind that could make or ruin a session. He lived in Pescadero, where the sea was his second home. The incident occurred on a typical morning. The water was softly glowing orange because the sun had just risen. Still holding on to the last of the night's chill, the air was crisp. Ever the early riser, Tommy had already dressed and set out gliding across the glassy water on his board. Although a few other surfers were in the lineup, the atmosphere was calm, as it usually was in the early morning before the beachgoers showed up. Tommy had been riding the waves for almost an hour when it occurred. It was a clean 5-foot peeler, the kind of wave surfers dreamed of catching. Every time he rode it, a wave of freedom and excitement swept over him. But as he leaned into his final turn, an odd thing happened. It seemed as though something enormous had pulled his board from under him, causing it to jerk violently. Tommy momentarily lost his balance, but his years of practice kept him standing. As he looked down, his heart raced, hoping to spot a fin or some other indication of what had caused the unexpected pull. However, the wave continued to carry him smoothly toward the shore, while the water remained calm. Tommy re-entered the lineup, puzzled, but not frightened. Before he realized something was amiss, he waited for the next set while sitting on his board. A new bite mark was visible in the middle of his board. The foam underneath was visible due to the jagged fiberglass edges. The bite was definitely from a shark. As Tommy looked at the damage, a chill came to him. He had no memory of any impact, sight of a fin, or shadow beneath the water, so how could he not have felt it or seen anything? With his thoughts racing, he swiftly turned his board toward the shore and paddled in. The realization that he had come dangerously close to death caused his heart to race by the time he reached the sand, not from the exertion. Other surfers gathered around Tommy when he arrived at the beach, and their expressions were a mixture of shock and worry. There was no doubt that the bite on the board was real. The most peculiar aspect, though, was that Tommy had experienced nothing. In retrospect, the phantom tug that might have been his final moment in the water had been the only sensation, neither pain nor shock. The incident dominated Tommy's thoughts for the next few days. The image of that bite and the sharp teeth marks that had been just inches from his body would not go away. To comprehend what had transpired, he began investigating local shark sightings. The California coast was home to many great white sharks, particularly during the summer when the water was warmer and prey was abundant. However, it was disturbing to think that one of these enormous predators had approached so closely without his knowledge. Tommy's fixation increased. He started reading every shark behavior article and keeping tabs on shark migrations. He discovered that sharks frequently mistook surfboards for seals or other prey. However, it deeply troubled him that the shark had bitten his board and vanished without a trace. Was he highly fortunate, or was it a warning or a miscalculation? After a few weeks, Tommy started to get out of the water. After everything that had happened, he couldn't bring himself to paddle out. The ocean seemed dangerous after serving as his haven, with hidden predators waiting beneath the surface. His friends observed his transformation. He became more withdrawn and reserved and devoted more time to his computer than the beach. They attempted to reassure him that shark attacks were uncommon and that he had just been unlucky. Tommy, however, couldn't get rid of the thought that something more had occurred that day. Tommy didn't feel at ease until he talked to Dr. Beatrice Lorne, a local marine biologist specializing in shark behavior. According to Dr. Lorne, sharks were susceptible animals that could pick up even the slightest movement in the water. The shark's curiosity rather than aggression was probably the reason it bit his board but did not attack him. It most likely quickly retreated after realizing mid-bite that the board wasn't food. Nevertheless, Tommy's mind was not much calmed by this knowledge. Every time he gazed out to sea, the fear continued to gnaw at him. He spent weeks on land observing the waves from afar, uncertain if he would ever feel secure enough to go into the water again. However, the ocean's pull eventually proved to be too great. Months after the incident, Tommy stood on the beach one morning with his repaired board beneath his arm. The water was inviting and the waves were ideal. After inhaling deeply, he paddled out, his heart racing with each stroke. A wave of serenity swept over him as he caught his first wave. Although his love for the ocean, unshakable even by a phantom bite, moderated the fear, it was still there. Tommy became more watchful and cognizant of the dangers after that day. However, he continued surfing. The memory of that day would always be with him, but it no longer held him in check. The ocean remained his haven. It served as a reminder of how fleeting life can be and how fortunate he was because there was only a bite on his board and not his body. It was the summer of 2005 on a sun-kissed beach in Port Macquarie, Australia, a town renowned for its stunning coastlines and vibrant surf culture. Shelley Beach was a popular destination for both residents and visitors. Families found refuge there due to its warm waters and soft waves, but the danger was below the surface. There had been shark sightings in the area, particularly tiger sharks, which were renowned for their vicious nature and strong jaws. Numerous beachgoers disregarded the warnings as just another summer fright, but the lure of the ocean made it impossible to ignore them. Shelley Beach lifeguard Beth Holloway had been there for over 10 years. At 32, she was highly experienced, having undergone extensive training for all potential emergencies. She had rescued drowning victims, pulled people out of rip currents, and even rescued a few surfers from jellyfish stings. However, she had no idea she would experience the most terrifying ordeal of her career as she looked over the horizon from her high chair that fateful Monday. With the sun high in the sky, there was a lot of activity on the beach. Kids splashed in the shallows while families ate picnics along the shore. It was a typical summer day, but suddenly the silence was broken by a shrill scream. Beth quickly looked in the direction of the noise. A panic-stricken woman was frantically pointing in the direction of the sea. Her voice wavered as she cried out that her son had strayed too far past the shallow's protection. Beth's heart began racing. As her trained eyes scanned the water, she saw a small figure bobbing up and down in the deeper waters while clinging to an inflatable raft. Fear was a mask on the child's face, and the gap between him and the shore was getting wider by the moment. Beth quickly picked up her rescue board and ran to the surf. Before plunging into the water, her feet thudded against the scorching sand, and her strong strokes propelled her ahead. Her thoughts were racing as she sliced through the waves, She needed to maintain her composure and focus. She had done this 100 times, but as she got closer to the boy, she noticed a shadowy figure moving around the little raft just below the surface. A beat skipped through her chest. One of the tiger sharks seen in the vicinity days earlier was visible. Only a few meters from the boy, the enormous predator hid its streamlined body, slicing through the water like a ghost. Beth knew that any abrupt movement could trigger the shark's predatory tendencies. She had to maintain her composure and move slowly and purposefully. She tenderly touched the side of the raft as she came to the boy whose name she would later discover was Finn Marlowe. She could see the silent cry for assistance when their wide, frightened eyes locked. Comfort, however, was not an option. As the shark's shadow reappeared and circled closer, Beth looked at the water again, her heartbeat accelerating. She couldn't risk panicking or splashing. She had to return them to shore. Because of the shark's proximity, any erratic movement could indicate to the predator that the victim was distressed. She motioned for Finn to stay still, her calm demeanor masking the fear gnawing at her insides. Beth began slowly, methodically paddling her rescue board, keeping the raft tethered to her side. She directed her strokes toward the shore, ensuring they were steady and fluid. The tension of knowing that the tiger shark was still observing caused the minutes to drag on for hours. The typical sounds of the waves were a faint hum in her ears, as if the ocean held its breath. As Beth battled the current and led them closer and closer to shore, the distance seemed unachievable, and every muscle in her body hurt. She could sense the shark lurking beneath them, and the primal fear of being pursued by one of the deadliest predators in the world was eating away at her will. She couldn't afford to let fear rule her, though. Beth's ability to maintain her composure was crucial. Beth saw the shark again closer, this time its dorsal fin breaking the surface just when she thought they might make it. It was enormous, quickly more than 3 meters long, approaching them more closely, now moving with greater purpose. Beth's mind was racing. She knew she couldn't do much to prevent the shark from attacking. However, she also knew that sharks sometimes studied their prey before attacking, so there was still a chance if they didn't agitate it. Beth could see the other lifeguards heading toward the water, prepared to help when they were around 30 meters from the shore. She couldn't, however, look away from the shark. Now it was right below them, its shadow menacing. She experienced a single moment of time and danger compression that would define her for the rest of her life. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the shark seemed to lose interest. Its shadow drifted away, disappearing into the deeper waters. Beth hadn't allowed herself to feel relief yet. Before the other lifeguards could assist in dragging Finn and the raft safely to shore, she continued to paddle, her movement still deliberate. Beth fell to her knees as soon as they touched the sand, her body shaking with relief and tiredness. Applause broke out from the assembled crowd as Finn's mother hurried to embrace her son, tears running down her cheeks. Beth, who had always been professional, forced a weary smile. But she was still processing how close they had been to catastrophe on the inside. Everyone in town talked about Beth's rescue in the days that followed. She was hailed as a hero in the local news coverage of the incident. However, Beth quietly asserted that she was merely carrying out her duties. She was nevertheless affected by the event for a long time. She had overcome one of her biggest fears, but knew she would never forget that shadow beneath the water, the silent threat that had tested her in unexpected ways. It served as a reminder of the precarious equilibrium between life and death, and the erratic strength of the ocean that Beth had devoted her life to preserving. In the summer of 2011, a group of college friends arrived in Belize excited to dive in the famous waters off Ambergris Cay for a week. Among them were Alex Corvin and Liz Vandrell, who had spent months organizing this journey. The dive at Coral Ridge, a breathtaking underwater formation renowned for its vibrant coral structures and teeming marine life, was the high point of their week. Despite being a diver's paradise, the ridge had its share of dangers, including strong currents, jagged corals, and the occasional reef shark. Divers had a long-standing reputation for Coral Ridge. It was both stunning and dangerous, located in the second-largest coral reef system in the world, the Belize Barrier Reef. Parts of the reef formed shallow ledges that fell into the abyss, and the reef itself extended for miles. Although it was well known for sporadic shark sightings, The location was a hub for marine biologists researching the varied ecosystem in the 1980s. Locals always urged caution, especially when blood entered the water, even though the reef sharks were generally calm and uninterested in people. In mid-July, the water was warm, clear, and inviting. As the group of divers reached the ridge, their fins kicked up tiny streams of sand, and they descended slowly. Alex and Liz were confident in their skills because they had previously dived together. They remained near the group as they observed the lively life surrounding them. The underwater world was bathed in a serene glow as schools of fish darted in and out of the coral and golden sunlight filtered down. Things changed halfway through the dive. The group noticed a reef shark gliding elegantly in the distance as a shadow passed overhead. Its sleek body quickly moved through the water, around 6 feet long. Initially, nobody was alarmed. In these waters, reef sharks were widespread and rarely dangerous, especially when left alone. Keeping a respectful distance from the creature, the group explored. However, a problem arose. While diving, Gavin, a less experienced diver, came too close to a rocky coral outcrop. As his leg brushed against the jagged edge, causing a deep cut, he flinched back in agony. The water started to turn murky, and blood formed a slow red stream that rose in gentle plumes. Until then, the shark had shown no interest but abruptly changed course. Once slow and deliberate, its movements started to become more unpredictable. Its sleek gray body sliced through the water with unnerving speed as it circled back toward the group. When Liz noticed the shark's change in behavior, her heart rate increased. A concentrated predatory energy took the place of its previous passive manner. Fear spread among the group. Aware of the danger, the divers started swimming frantically and instinctively upward. A frenzied blur of fins and flailing limbs was created as everyone kicked frantically toward the water's surface, filling it with bubbles. Liz and Alex got separated in the rush because they were confused. Liz looked around, but the churning water and the cloud of bubbles blocked her vision. Alex was nowhere to be found. Knowing that panic would only worsen matters, Liz struggled to maintain steady breathing. Now that it could smell blood in the water, the shark circled closer. She kicked toward the surface while frantically searching for her companions, but all she could see were ephemeral shadows. Her lungs burned from holding her breath and the surface appeared so far away. Then it horrified her that the shark was beneath her. As it moved with terrifying grace, its gaze was fixed on her. Liz froze, her thoughts racing. From reading about sharks, she knew that abrupt movements could set off their predatory tendencies. Despite her heart thumping in her chest, she moved slowly and inched upward. With deliberate and calculated movements, the shark followed her. It was hunting now, not merely inquisitive. With the surface still tantalizingly out of reach, Liz could feel the weight of the water bearing down on her. Even though she knew she needed to remain composed, every fiber in her body begged her to swim more quickly to escape. She could now see the rough texture of the shark's skin and the scars along its snout because it was close enough. It circled again, its movements becoming more precise as though it was assessing her. Liz's attention was suddenly drawn to a sudden movement. A man named Marlowe, one of the dive instructors, had spotted the threat and rapidly approached her while brandishing an underwater flashlight. The shark appeared startled by the bright beam and swerved off course, distracted by the unexpected flash of light. Liz used the chance to kick as hard as she could, propelling herself upward while her legs burned. Liz broke through the surface, her chest heaving as she gasped for air. Frantically, she scanned the water for Alex, looking everywhere. A few feet away, he surfaced a few moments later, unharmed, except for wide, terrified eyes. The other divers appeared one by one, shaken, but unharmed. When the boat captain noticed the disturbance, he approached them and yanked them on board. When they were all on deck at last, the group sat in stunned silence, their bodies shaking from the adrenaline and their faces going pale. Gavin had a deep cut on his leg, but it wasn't life-threatening. He apologized profusely, but no one blamed him. They all knew how quickly things could have turned deadly. Liz and Alex exchanged glances as the boat sped back to shore, trying to process what had just happened. Liz, still rattled, couldn't shake the image of the shark's cold, calculating eyes. They had come to Belize for an adventure and had undoubtedly found one, just not the kind they had expected. In the following weeks, Liz replayed the dive in her mind, and the memory of the shark's relentless approach seared into her thoughts. She had always loved the ocean, but now she had a new respect for it, and a deeper understanding of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface. The experience had changed her, but she was grateful to have escaped with nothing more than a story of a dive gone wrong at Coral Ridge that she would never forget. It happened in the summer of 2001 near Gansbai, a small fishing community known as the Great White Shark Capital of the World on the southern coast of South Africa. The waters here were cold, the tides strong, and the ocean floor a dark maze of jagged corals and underwater ravines. For decades, this stretch of ocean had been a gathering point for great white sharks, which were drawn by the expansive seal colonies of nearby Dyer Island. Tourists, photographers, and marine enthusiasts often flocked to this location, seeking a glimpse of the ocean's most fearsome predator. Evan Draycott was one of those people, although he was not just a casual tourist. Evan was a skilled underwater photographer who had made a living by documenting the most dangerous and elusive marine life. His portfolio included close-ups of moray eels, enormous humpback whales, and poisonous jellyfish. However, he had not gotten a close-up of a great white since most photographers used steel cages for protection. He wanted to capture the shark's unadulterated strength and presence in the wild, not just a photograph of it. Karl Swart, a seasoned diver experienced in navigating shark-infested waters, was Evans's local guide during his 3 days in South Africa. Evans's ambition overcame Karl's repeated warnings about the risks of free diving close to great white sharks. He explained that the shot would be career-defining. Karl had previously heard that from other thrill-seekers who misjudged the animals. He had witnessed enough near misses to recognize when someone was taking risks. Still, Evan was determined, and Karl reluctantly agreed to take him to a spot just outside Shark Alley, where the predators often fed. The morning of the dive, the water was deceptively calm. The sky was overcast and a muted light was cast over the sea. Donning his wetsuit and oxygen tank, Evan checked his underwater camera meticulously. Standing on the boat's edge, Karl gave Evan a final warning, his voice firm but resigned to the fact that Evan would proceed no matter what. As Evan slipped into the water, the cold immediately bit into his skin, even through the thick neoprene. Slowly, the world above vanished into the murky blue below him as he descended. Evan positioned himself close to a sizable coral outcropping that protruded from the ocean floor at a depth of about 12 meters. The coral provided some cover. He could observe the open water where the sharks were known to hunt. Karl had lured the sharks with chum, and Evan could already see the dark, shadowy shapes circling in the distance. His heart raced as one of the great whites, a massive female at least 5 meters long, began to swim closer. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. But as Evan raised his camera, something went wrong. In his eagerness to get the perfect angle, he miscalculated his position. He attracted the shark's attention by swimming too far behind the coral. After spotting something strange in its domain, the great white turned its enormous body in his direction. Its dead black eyes stared at him for a terrifying moment. Evan went cold. He was aware of his error. Slowly, with purposeful predatory movements, the shark started to circle him. Evan knew better than to panic, even though his mind was racing. Any abrupt movement could trigger an attack. In the stillness of the water, every breath he took felt like a thunderous roar despite his efforts to stay motionless. A continual reminder that he was in the shark's territory was the sound of his oxygen bubbles echoing in his ears. The tension caused Evans's muscles to ache as the shark made another pass, this time closer. Its enormous body moved quickly through the water just a few meters away. The boat seemed too far away, and the coral outcropping that had previously provided solace now appeared insufficient protection. He became acutely aware that he was confined. The shark separated him and the boat's safety. All he could do was wait. The shark kept circling him, and the minutes seemed like hours. Evans's mind whirled into a tangle of regret and terror. In that instant, he realized that his passion had temporarily blinded him to the genuine dangers of the ocean, and he wondered why he had disregarded Karl's warnings and acted so carelessly in his quest for the ideal shot. This differed from the respect he had always shown the animals he photographed. This creature was more than just something to photograph. He was prey to this predator. The shark eventually started to become disinterested. It made one final pass, its long tail swishing through the water like a whip, and then, just as silently as it had appeared, it vanished into the depths. Evan didn't move for several minutes, unsure if the shark was gone. His heart pounded in his chest and his breathing was shallow. At last he summoned the courage to swim slowly back toward the coral, watching the water for any movement. Without saying a word, Carol dragged him onto the boat. Still shaking from the adrenaline, Evan fell to the deck. The camera felt heavy in his hands despite not knowing if he had even captured the shot. It didn't matter at the time. It was sufficient that he was still alive. As the boat headed back to shore, Evan sat in silence, staring out at the endless expanse of ocean. The experience had changed him. Instead of finding the ideal shot when he arrived in South Africa, he discovered something much more valuable: respect. Respect for the sea, its life, and the lines that must never be crossed. His thirst for the perfect shot had nearly cost him his life. By the time they reached the dock, Evan was a changed man. The thrill of danger no longer seemed worth the risk. He would continue photographing the ocean's wonders, but from now on, he would do so with a newfound reverence for the creatures he sought to capture. He understood that the ideal shot would never be worth his life. In the summer of 2010, Dr. Rachel Lee, an emergency physician from Chicago, had carved a rare week out of her hectic schedule for a solo vacation in Maui, Hawaii. The island was known for its pristine beaches, tropical rainforests, and vibrant coral reefs that drew thousands of divers and swimmers each year. After months of grueling shifts in the emergency room, Rachel craved a quiet retreat. Staying near Makina Beach, she spent her days exploring the coastline and her evenings indulging in a routine she had quickly grown fond of: twilight swims. As the sun set, the beach was all but empty. The water was placid and the sky was tinted in shades of pink and orange. It was the perfect way to unwind, leave behind the chaos of her job, and immerse herself in the gentle rhythm of the ocean waves. That evening, the beach was tranquil. The breeze carried the scent of salt and hibiscus, and Rachel felt the cool water lap against her legs as she waded in. She swam out from shore, the darkening sky above her and the water below turning a deeper shade of blue. The world around her felt peaceful, almost meditative. She floated on her back, letting the gentle waves cradle her. Her eyes closed with her mind at ease. Then her leg was touched by something. She initially assumed it to be a piece of driftwood. She ignored the common floating debris on the beach and kept swimming. However, a peculiar feeling overcame her as she swam. She noticed something big moving slowly, almost idly, in a broad circle around her. A shadow beneath the surface. Her breath caught. Her heart started beating rapidly in her chest. Rachel's first impulse was to swim quickly back to shore. However, years of medical training took over and advised her to maintain her composure. Only panic would exacerbate the situation. She had witnessed enough mishaps in her profession to know that fear frequently resulted in deadly errors. She forced herself to think clearly as she inhaled slowly and deliberately. The dark figure gliding beneath her was unmistakably a shark. It barely mattered that she was unable to identify the type. She was alone 100 yards from the coast, and there was no one to be seen as the shark circled. The closest lifeguard tower was closed for the day, and the beach was empty. Every muscle in her body tensed as she resisted the urge to run. But she was wiser. Rapid movements may trigger the shark's predatory instincts. She had to go steadily and slowly. With deliberate and controlled strokes, Rachel started to slither toward the shore. She watched the shadow continue to circle while keeping her gaze on the water surrounding her. She maintained her focus despite her shallow breathing and the tension building in her chest. Each stroke felt like an eternity. The distance to the shore stretching out before her was impossibly long. The shark was still there, cutting through the water with a grace and silence that made her skin crawl. She had no idea how long it had been following her, or how much longer it would stay. Her mind raced with strategies. Could she make a sudden dash for the shore? Could she still float and hope it lost interest? She felt utterly powerless. A doctor who was used to being in control of life and death situations was now at the mercy of an ancient predator. The shore was getting closer, but she could still see the dark shape beneath her. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, The shark seemed to veer away, its shadow disappearing into the deeper waters. Rachel paused, uncertain if it was gone, but she continued to move. Now that the water was waist-deep, she stood with her feet touching the sandy bottom and let out a sharp breath. With trembling legs, she waded swiftly to shore. Breathless and trembling, she fell onto the beach, met by the cool sand. She sat there staring at the ocean for a long time, her heart still racing. The sky had darkened completely, and the stars began peering through the night. The water looked as calm and inviting as earlier, but Rachel knew better now. The ocean could turn on anyone instantly, even in the shallow waters where you thought you were safe. The experience left her rattled, a stark reminder that no amount of training or preparation could fully shield her from the unpredictability of life. She had spent years as a doctor treating countless emergencies, always in control, always the one who knew what to do. But here in the open water, she had been vulnerable in a way she hadn't anticipated. For the remainder of her vacation, Rachel avoided the twilight swims she had once loved. The ocean was still beautiful and mesmerizing, but now it held a different kind of power. It was a reminder of the thin line between safety and danger, between life and death, one that even a seasoned emergency physician couldn't always predict or control. When she returned to Chicago, the memory of that close call stayed with her, a quiet hum beneath the surface of her everyday life. It wasn't fear that lingered, but a new appreciation for the delicate balance between human resilience and the uncontrollable forces of nature.